Hi guys, I'm Adair. I'm here in lovely Venice, Italy, and I'm so excited to be sharing a little bit of Venice today with you. Some of my favorite locations, some of the main locations you should be seeing, and telling you a little bit of history and legend along the way. I've lived here now for 10 years. I'm originally from the States, but I am Italian-American. From blood right and family born in Italy, and now I give tours personally to guests here in Venice, sharing my Venice with them and exactly why I fell in love with Venice. And today we're going to start off with a local tradition that you must do when you arrive, and it's about eating and drinking, which everyone loves to do when they come to Italy, right? So if you want, let's go do our first stop. So here we are at the first stop. It's called Bacaro Risorto, and there's actually a lot of tradition behind the name. Bacaro is what the term is used for Venetian bar, and you can find Baccari all over the city. Risorto means resurrected. So what these guys have done is they found a bar that once was turned into, gelato shop, milk shop, different things over the years, but when they restored it, they found old photos of the original state of it when it was a real Bacaro in Venice, and antique times when Baccaros were all over the city and Venetians would come and have drinks at the bar in typical Venetian fashion. So the idea is that they resurrected that idea and they brought it back to life. So Bacaro Risorto, resurrected bar. Once upon a time you could find Baccari all over the city because this was a port city. So when the men came off the ships after sailing for months at a time, the one thing they wanted to do was drink, right? So there was Baccari everywhere, which also helps invented the idea of cicchetti. So cicchetti are the Venetian tapas, but don't say tapas to Venetians because they don't like to be referred to as Spanish tapas. They think they invented them first. But cicchetti were literally invented to help sober up the guys drinking too much in the Baccari in the antique time of Venice. So here you can find the most delicious cicchetti on crostini. When it's specifically on bread, it's called crostino, and they have different toppings from meat, cheese, fish, everything you can find, and you just go in and you choose as many as you want, 5, 10 a piece, snack on it, make it a long lunch or make it a long aperitivo with drinks and spritz as well. So I don't know if you know, but actually when you cross bridges in Venice, you're actually changing one island to the next island, because the Venice island, which we call one, is actually made up of 120 islands. So imagine that you are leaving one island and going to the next every time you cross a bridge. One thing you always have to remember when you walk in Venice is that we're on an island and the pace is slow. So between island life with Venetians and also all the tourism, we do walk kind of calm and relaxed and never get worried about getting lost, because you can't go that far, as the island is only 3 by 5 kilometers. If you go any farther, you'll be swimming. So no worry, just wandering the streets is the best way to enjoy the city, and don't worry about where you're going sometimes, but get lost. That is part of the beauty in Venice. So here we have one of the most famous bridges. You know, there's like 380 bridges in Venice, but this by far is the most famous, probably more famous than Rialto Bridge, and photographed the most as well. It's called Ponte di Sospiri. What does Ponte di Sospiri mean? Ponte means bridge, Sospiri means sigh. So like sad sigh. Why does it have its name? It's because on the right side of me here is the Doge Palace, where the Duke lived and the government held the jurisdictions of people that were guilty for crimes or not guilty. So if you were founded guilty for a serious crime, you would actually cross over the bridge into the dungeon, and once you go into the dungeon, you are never coming back out. So literally you see these little windows with little holes in them. You see like a slit of Venice through it, and you look out at San Giorgio Maggiore, the church and the island on the other side, and you sigh because it's so sad that you will never see it again. If you created minor crimes, you actually were placed in the jail cells above the Doge Palace, and those jail cells are called piombe. Piombe means lead, because they actually used lead nails to nail the cells together. So when the heat on the rooftop heated up the lead, you actually were made to feel very uncomfortable in the jail cells because of the heat from the lead and the nails. And it's actually famous as well for Casanova being imprisoned inside the jail cells 2 times. One time he escaped from the rooftop, and the other time they say he just walked out the front door because he was so smooth like that. One of the most symbolic symbols of Venice obviously is the gondola, right? Everyone knows Venice is famous for gondolas and gondoliers, the men that drive the gondoliers around. One of the most important parts of the gondola is actually the very front. You can see this metal artwork here that's very, well done, handcrafted, and a very important part of the gondola, and actually means every piece of it means something about Venice. So if you look at the shape of it, it's like an S, Canal Grande. The top part, if you flip it over, it's like the hat of the Doge, the Duke of Venice. Underneath it is the arc of Rialto Bridge. The 6 prongs on the front represent the 6 antique neighborhoods of Venice: San Marco, San Polo, Santa Croce, Dossoduro, Canareggio, and Castello. Those little metal pieces in between the 6 prongs represent Murano, Burano, Torcello, other famous islands of Venice, as well as the 7th last prong on the back by itself is Giudecca Island, which Giudecca Island is one of the islands that it existed in antique times in Venice. It just never got attached to this island. But every piece of this means something symbolic to Venice and represents Venice in some way, as well as the symbol of the gondola in general in Venice. I'm sure you cannot mistake where we're arriving now. It's San Marco Square. We're on the back end, and it opens up over there, which we're going to go in front of the Basilica now, have a look at the square in general, and talk about some of the things that you can find here that are really important to check out when you first come to Venice. Actually, I want to stop. One thing to note about Venice is I'm sure you'll take into account how many wells you see all over the city. I told you before, the island is made up of 120 islands. There's like 380 bridges, 180 churches more or less, and there's roughly 600 wells in the city. These are extremely important in antique times of Venice because they actually filtrated rainwater in the city, allowing people to collect rainwater underneath us and have fresh water to drink. Because imagine they lived around brackish water, half salty, half sweet. It was undrinkable, and it was really the only resource that they did not have available to them on this island, because they could fish, they had money coming in from the ports, they built their own island, etc. The one thing they missed was drinking water, and they actually found a way to filter rainwater to have it available to them as much as possible. And of course, you don't have rain all the time, so when they didn't have rain, they would go to the mainland, fill up big tubs, and bring it back and fill up the wells. The wells can be found in open areas in the public squares, or most of them are also behind churches and public or private uses behind noble homes. And almost every noble home that you see in Venice has its own well inside of its courtyard, so that's why the number is so high, and there's like 600 of them all over the city. So I'm sure many of you know that this square is not mistakable for any other square in the world. Definitely one of the most beautiful squares you can find anywhere in Italy, because of the architecture. We're on an island, but also because of the Basilica behind us, San Marco, which is for the patron saint of Venice, San Marco. His body is buried here, but it was not always buried here. The funny story about how it arrived is actually the Venetians went to Constantinople during the 1200s, during the Fourth Crusades, and they actually stole his body. In order to do this, they actually had to put his body under pork meat, because the Muslims would not touch pork meat and they wouldn't get inside there and get all dirty. So they hid his body, a saint's body, under pork meat, and were able to ship it out and have it buried here. There are rumors that it got lost over the years because this building has been caught on fire many times and restored, and then finally they refound it inside of a column hidden away for many years, and they were all very happy when they finally found it again. Talking about Venetians stealing things, they're actually quite famous for stealing things, but if you speak to a Venetian, they like to say that they recycle things instead of stealing them. One of the most important things they stole actually was the horses that you see on the top of the Basilica. These are not the original ones. The original ones now are hidden away in a museum, but these are duplicates because the original ones are said to be from before Christ times in Egypt. So they do have a lot of history to them. Napoleon also stole them from Venice at one point, but thank God they were sent back after Napoleon was not the occupator of Venice anymore, and they were able to restore them in Venice, which again, those are not the original ones, but they are duplicates and they look very, very real. If you can look up over here behind me on the right side, there is a Doge on his kneeling down to the lion with the wings, yeah? We call the lion with wings, which actually is a griffin, and that's the symbol of San Marco. So the Doge, the Duke of Venice, actually had to kneel down and, work for San Marco in a way. The Duke was, the leader of Venice, the Republic, but he never had full power by any means, and San Marco was always the most important symbol in Venice for any Venetian. The griffin, lion with the wings, actually sometimes also gets referred to as moeke lion. Moeke is a soft-shelled crab in Venice, very popular to eat when it's fried, because you can eat the whole entire shell, which might sound weird, but I promise you the whole shell you can eat with the legs and everything, and it's called moeke. And when the lion is not a 3D statue, but a sculpture on the wall, his wings kind of plaster up behind him. And they like to refer to these as the legs of the moeke crab, because it looks similar to that. Kind of the symbolism also is that the crab comes from the water, the lion with the wings rises from the water, just like Venice has risen from the water. Over the years, Venice has a very romantic symbolism with the water, and even the Doge marries the water at one point in his rulership, or whatever I guess you can call it. He actually goes out to the lagoon with a wedding ring and gives the wedding ring to the sea, because he marries her, because the sea was very important for the Venetians. It brought money. They actually also considered Acqua Alta, the high water, to actually come into the city and cleanse it for them. So it was never really considered a negative thing until recent times, when it became extremely high. So as romantic as Venice once was, and amazing and serene it might seem, they also have a little bit of a dark secret, and they did do beheadings and certain things for people that created certain crimes. And actually they like to say, which is not really documented, but the rumor is that the Doge would come out in between these two red pinkish columns and announce the people that were going to be hung for the day. A lot of times they did it in front of the bell tower here in San Marco, so everyone could see where they were going to die and be hung. They also say, like, sometimes they would hang the bodies up here and stretch them out so everyone could see like what happens to you if you commit certain crimes. So they say that the columns are like the color of blood in a representation. But even when the Doge came out on this stand to declare that you were going to die, you had one last saving grace that you could try to do, which again, this is legend and rumor, who knows if it's true, but I want to go show you what you could do to try to get out of being hung, okay? So like I said, there's one saving grace that you could do to get yourself out of being hung, and it has to do with this column behind me. You have to actually try to cross the column without holding on to anything, and with your back to it. And if you fall, you would be hung. If you didn't fall, it means that God forgave you for your crime and you could survive another day. So right now, we're in San Marco Square, the Doge Palace, the Basilica. An interesting fact about this area is that we sit 90 centimeters above sea level here, okay? So a lot of people think Venice is sea level, but it's not actually sea level. The lowest area is 90 centimeters, and that's where we are now. So when they talk about Acqua Alta, high water, this is the first area that it actually comes into. It does not come in from the edge of the water, it comes in from the drains underneath. So the first sign of high water is little puddles in San Marco Square. When they tell you that there's 100 centimeters of high water in Venice, it literally means 10 centimeters here in San Marco. It does not mean from the ground and up. And we're here at 90 centimeters. There's other places in Venice that sit 190 centimeters, 200 centimeters. So you can imagine that if there's 100 centimeters of high water, not every place in Venice actually gets affected by the high water. And Venetians will know the exact height of their business, their home, ground floor activities. So when the high water is predicted, Venetians can actually prepare for that height of water. So if your home is at 180 and the high water is going to be 130, in theory, you don't have anything to worry about. If your home sits at 130 and the high water is going to be 150, you have to do some preparation. And there's really no stopping the water from coming into your home. All you can really do is lift up important furniture or electrical devices out of the way. Because obviously it's salt water and it will eat through any electrical wires that you have or any devices. So you literally just lift it up, let the water come in, it goes back out like the tide. It comes in for a couple hours, goes back out, just like if you were at the beach, high tide, low tide. And when it goes back out, you come in, you mop it up, you spray some spray because it stinks of some mold, and so you just need to spray it down a little bit so that the air is fresh again. But if you ever want to see high water, the best place to see it at first is in San Marco Square, and then hopefully you never have to go swimming in it, because as you've seen in the past couple years, the high water is coming in a little bit higher and a little bit higher due to, you know, climate changes, or also they say that the city sinks a little bit, but it's really not sinking. It's just moving naturally above the sand that it's built on. There's nothing too threatening about it. And if I have to be 100% honest, high water maybe is just as damaging as low water, because the city is built on wooden platforms into the sand ground, and if they touch air, these wooden piles, they can deteriorate. Once the wood is in the water, it actually petrifies like cement, so it's actually very strong. But if the air ever gets into the foundation of the city, it can deteriorate the wood that they find underneath the ground that we're standing on now. So low water can be just as damaging as high water. Now we're in front of the oldest running cafe house in all of Italy, Florian Cafe. This was not the original name when they made it in the 1700s, but it took this name on because it was the last name of the owner, and it became one of the first places that noble people, non-noble people could hang out, as well as women, because in that period women were not welcome everywhere. And this was the first coffee house that they actually allowed women to come into. So people joke around that it was very famous for Casanova to come here because he could actually bring his lovers and hang out in public, which wasn't something that he could always do. It's very decorative. It has frescoes inside, antique, very beautiful decorations from the 1700s. And you will spend about 10, 13 euros on a hot chocolate here. But if you're a hot chocolate fan, it is the best hot chocolate you'll ever have in your life. And they even have one called Casanova hot chocolate with some mint toppings and whatnot inside. Very delicious. Now we're going to actually walk under the clock tower that you can see in behind me. Some interesting things to note about the clock tower is that the bell on the rooftop was made in the Arsenale of Venice. The Arsenale is the arsenal, so imagine that's where they made the ships of the day, their military, their army, and this bell was also made there in the 1400s, and it's still the original one from that day. So maybe one of the oldest bells that you can find around the city. And the two figures around it are in bronze, and one is an old man and one is a young man to represent the passing of time. Imagine it's the clock tower, so passing of time, and they also have the guys on top representing passing of time. They're also bronze, so they're dark-skinned figures, which also refer to Moors of Venice. Moors of Venice were dark-skinned people. Imagine Venice was the melting pot of its day, with all different kinds of cultures coming here and whatnot, so they were introduced to Africans, Indians, you know, all kinds of different colored skinned people, so they kind of referred to them as Moors. Wasn't anything negative, it's just a way to distinguish. So they refer to those two guys on the top, the Moors, and they actually go off every hour and they ring the bell for San Marco Square. Also, since we're here, I'd like to mention, you know, the bell tower of San Marco, the church, actually is only about 100 years old. It fell down after they did a extension to it, and the ground underneath couldn't handle the extra weight, so it actually fell down 100 years ago and has been rebuilt. Interesting story about the bell tower and wine in Venice. There used to be a market in Venice, or in San Marco Square. So imagine that the wine guy, the wine vendor, he was hanging out underneath this bell tower selling his wine, and during the day he would actually shift his position to follow the shadow of the bell tower to protect his wine. So shadow in Italian is umbra, okay? And when Venetians go drink a glass of wine, they actually say andiamo a bere un'umbra, let's go drink an umbra. So wine glasses in Venice between Venetians is referred to as umbra, shadow, just like the guy that hung out underneath the shadows and sold his wine. The clock tower above me also you can see is blue with gold elements on it. It also tells you the zodiac signs as well. And it was specifically placed in this area so the people passing by in the water behind us or in front of me could actually see the blue and the gold from a long distance in a way to represent the wealth and the beauty of Venice, even from the first, on site when you're passing by San Marco Square. As we go underneath here, we're going to be walking along the Merceria. Merceria is the street that connects San Marco to Rialto. And they actually kind of symbolically say it's the street that connects the government, Doge Palace, the San Marco Basilica, religion, right? So this is the political religion area. And we're now going to the commercial economic area, Rialto, where money was traded, where people arrived to sell merchandise and products and spices and all that. So it's the street that connects those two elements together, maybe the most important elements of the city overall, and it's called Merceria. Merceria is a term in English for like shops in general. So as you walk along this, you will see a lot of shopping, usually high-end products, but yeah, kind of just a lot of shopping. So I remind you that we just celebrated the birthday of Venice March 25th, 1,600 years of history, okay? So you can imagine keeping a city together with 1,600 years of history takes some work. So above me we have some construction, and I bring that up because I actually wanted to talk about a little, not necessarily a statue, but a relief that is on the wall above us of a little lady that has this like mason jar in her hand, and it looks like it's like falling out of her hand, okay, in this like sculpture. And it's actually a story about how this little lady, Signore Rossi, her last name was Rossi, was the person that stopped a revolt happening in Venice. There was a man called Tiepo who wanted to revolt against the Doge and throw the Doge out of seat at one point. So they were walking down the Merceria like in a gang, like, ooh, we're going to throw the government over, etc., etc. And they were mostly noble people. So think about it. Usually revolts maybe are done by the poor people, but this one was done by the nobles. And the normal everyday person actually was against it. So this little old lady was not wealthy by any means, and to stop the revolt or just cause a little bit of problems, she supposedly threw out of her own window this little cement mortar block that actually hit the kid that was carrying the flag for the revolt in the head and killed the kid. So it scared everyone in the revolt, and they all dispersed, and it saved the Republic for that year and that time in revolt. So they actually made a little relief on the wall to remind you of the little old lady who stopped the revolt, the revolution happening in Venice, which you can't see right now, but maybe when you come next time it'll be available to check out. Actually, as we walk along the Merceria, I would like to talk about how Venice has its own dialect. We call it a dialect officially, but it's actually older than the Italian language. Imagine before Italy came to be in the 1800s, it was separated into different kingdoms. There was Naples, Rome, Milan, etc. all over, right? So they all had their own dialects, but basically their own languages. And being an island, the dialect here is very strong. Imagine there's not very much, mixture with other languages and whatnot, so it stays very deep embedded into the Venetian culture, their own dialect, which if you talk to Venetian, they will tell you it's a language. But just to give you some references to the differences in both languages, I actually like to compare Venetian dialect to American English and Italian to British English. So the accent is very different, and some words can be very different, but it is based on the same kind of grammatic organization and whatnot. Some of my favorite Venetian words are bajiji is my first one. I love to say it and I love to eat them. They are peanuts. So if you go into a bar and you want some peanuts, ask the waiter or the barman for some bejiji, and I'm sure he'll get a chuckle out of it that you know some Venetian. In Venetian is bejiji, in Italian is arachidi. So two words completely different. Another one of my favorite words in Venetian dialect is called shkei, which means money. We all know that's important when you're traveling, so you can always ask the bartender how much shkei you have to give him, and he'll also find that pretty funny. These are words that are only used on the island or other islands in the lagoon. If you go anywhere else in Italy, they will not understand what you're saying. And just to give you an example again, shkei in Venetian is soldi in Italian. So again, two completely different words. And that's just touching, you know, a part of how different the dialect can be. And when you're walking around, you probably are hearing 80% dialect and just a little bit of Italian. When Venetians are together, they speak Venetian. They do not speak Italian. And I told you before that I was born in the States and I've lived here for 10 years. My Italian is very Venetianized, and I like to say I speak Bengliciano. So I made my own language. One of the best parts about being local in Venice is that I don't have to always walk on the main streets, and I can find the small streets and get away from the crowds. It might be very intimidating for most of you because Venice is like a labyrinth and you think you're going to get lost. But like I said before, it's only as large as 2 kilometers by 3 kilometers, so you can't get too far if you start wandering around the city. So have a little courage and go down the small streets, because maybe you'll find something that you wouldn't normally find. Now we are on the Rialto Bridge, and I'm sure if you come to Venice, it's one of the main stops you have to make, because we're basically like in the dead center of the heart of Venice. Rialto Bridge. They took this name on in the 1500s because this bridge that we're standing on was built in the 1500s. Before this bridge, it was made out of wood, and it was like an opening bridge, so like the ships could come down Canal Grande, because imagine this was a port city. So when you came to sell merchandise, fabric, spices, whatever you were selling, you would actually drive down Canal Grande and stop at the palace or the building that you were going to be doing business with. So they had to open the bridge. It was a drawbridge. Before those wooden bridges, actually bridges didn't really exist in Venice for several hundred years, and the only way you got around was by gondola. Everyone had a gondola. You can imagine it was like your car for the day, and that's how you just got around. I don't know if it's because Venetians didn't know how to build bridges at the beginning, or they only knew how to build them flat. If you ever make your way out to Burano, you'll see flat bridges, because they say that's how they used to make bridges until they learned how to actually curve them. The first bridge that ever existed was actually a temporary bridge here, and it was called Ponte Moneta, which means change bridge. So you actually had to pay to get across it. Imagine the first bridge they ever built, they made you pay to cross it. And they built that bridge primarily because of the importance of the area that we're going to after San Marco. We're going towards like the Rialto Mercato, and that was the major exchange of money in Venice. The market, right? That's where they exchanged money, exchanged goods, people gathered, you know, economy center, the economic center. So there was a fluctuation of people, and they had to make that bridge. Another interesting fact about this bridge right here is that they had a competition of designers, architects, design bridges to see which one would win. And the last name of the gentleman that won was De Ponte, which I've said it before, Ponte means bridge. So I don't know if that's a joke or if it was a coincidence, or if that's actually why they call bridges Ponte in Italy. But I think it's a very big coincidence that the designer of this bridge, his last name was Ponte. Another thing to check out when you're near Canal Grande in general, not just Rialto Bridge, is looking at the large palaces on the water. They're called Fondecos. Fondecos is a building like from the Arabic Turkish times for like working on the ground, living on the first and second floors, and then the smaller windows on the top were usually for servants and where they would put the kitchens at. Why would they put the kitchen on the top floor? Because kitchens would catch on fire, and being on the top floor was less plausible that the whole building would burn down. Poor servants anyways. The one we're looking at right here is by far one of the largest Fondecos on the Canal Grande, and it's actually the German depot, right? So Germans that would come here to work in antique Venice would actually come here to stay for the night and hang out. They had like 160 rooms available. It was not privately owned, but a lot of the palaces you see on Canal Grande were privately owned by different noble families. So their whole family would live inside there and work on the ground floor. The ground floor, you tend to see these large openings so they could easily move merchandise in and out of these buildings. Another thing to take into account is that on top of this palace, you can actually go check out for free the rooftop terrace. If you go to their website, Fondego dei Tedeschi Terrace Lookout, you can reserve a time and whatnot and go up for free and look out over the whole entire Canal Grande and the terracotta roofs of Venice for absolutely free. So definitely hit that up. Also, you notice I don't walk in the center of the bridge, I walk on the outside of the bridge because the center of the bridge is always way too full of people. Just a little note. So now we are in the Rialto area, and I kind of mentioned before on the bridge that bridge only existed from the 1500s and it's called Rialto Bridge, but this area is called Rialto and it had the name Rialto before that bridge ever existed. Why is that? Is because Rialto refers back to Latin terminology. Alto means high, Ri means like river, so high riverbank. So imagine that when this island did not exist, there was a high sandy bank that they could build the island on top of, and they called it Rialto, the high riverbank. And the first area they built this island on, which I don't know if I've officially mentioned that this is 100% man-made, they built it here. So imagine that you could have pieces of wood underneath us that they built the island on top of for thousands of years underneath us, as long as it has never touched air or oxygen, which would deteriorate the strength of the wood under the water. So imagine they built this church, which is kind of near me right now, and then the community around it, right? And they built a church over there, the community over there, another church there, and there's like these little pitch pods of islands popping up all over the city, slowly starting to connect, or if they did not connect officially, they would be connected by a bridge. Like I said, every time you walk over a bridge, you are changing islands in the city. Right now we're in the back of the church, but for a very specific reason. On the back of it, there's some Latin words written something along the lines of be honest, be truthful. When you're trading or dealing with money, don't rip people off, is basically what it's saying. Because like I said, this was the economic center of the city, so there was a lot of money being dealt here. And they put this church here, they say, to purposely remind people to be honest when dealing with money and working with people. And the Latin words on the back remind you of this daily. So I think it's only appropriate that we end this tour right now and basically where the city of Venice began, okay? This was one of the first churches they built, one of the first squares in this island that they built. And this is where we're going to end our tour today. I really appreciate you hanging out with me. I hope you learned some new fun facts. My name is Adair Michelle Bergeon. I also have Instagram, Adair M. Bergeon. Click on me, find my link, contact me, ask me some questions about your trip to Venice, or come have a personal tour with me. I'm happy to share Venice with you anytime, any place, anyhow. And I will leave you with the last word, ciao, which we use as hello and goodbye here. And actually, most people know ciao in the Italian language, but they do not know that it's originated in Venice. And it originates in Venice in the way of saying ciao with an S in front of it, vostro, which translates into your slave, okay? But it actually doesn't mean your slave exactly. It means at your service. So it's something fun to say to friends or friendly to say, saying I'm at your service. So you say ciao, but ciao, vostro, once upon a time in Venice history, and now we just say ciao to say goodbye. So, ciao!